The air in Taiwan that night was cold and sharp, the kind that seeps into your bones. Arya Jatmika, an Indonesian migrant worker, had just finished his grueling shift at a steel factory and was making his way home. Despite the fatigue weighing down his steps, his spirit remained strong. Every bead of sweat on his brow was a silent promise, a better future for his family back home in Indonesia. As he turned into a narrow alley, the silence of the night was suddenly shattered by a piercing scream. Arya froze, his heart pounding. Instinct took over, and he dashed toward the source of the cry. What he saw made his blood boil. In the shadows of the alley, 5 large men were attacking a woman. Her robe was torn, her body trembling with fear, but it was her attire that caught Arya's attention, a bright orange robe, unmistakably the garb of a Buddhist nun. Her delicate face, twisted in pain and confusion, looked hauntingly serene even in distress. Arya didn't hesitate. The martial arts training he received during his years at an Islamic boarding school kicked in. His feet moved before his mind could catch up. He launched himself at the attackers, his limbs a blur of speed and precision. One by one, the men went down, groaning in pain or scrambling to escape. Within moments, it was over. Panting, Arya knelt beside the injured woman. Her face was pale, eyes unfocused. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, reaching out with trembling hands. She didn't respond. Her lips quivered, but no words came out. Arya could see the terror behind her silence. Without thinking twice, he carefully lifted her into his arms and carried her away from the alley. A few blocks away, he found an abandoned building he sometimes passed by on his way home. Inside, he laid her on an old sofa, fetched a dusty blanket, and turned on a small heater. He then poured some warm water into a cup and held it out to her. "You're safe now," he said softly. "No one can hurt you anymore." The woman slowly turned to him, her eyes glassy but aware. "Thank you," she whispered in a hoarse voice. "You saved me." Her voice was soft but filled with depth. Arya nodded, his heart unsettled by a strange mix of emotions, relief, compassion, and something more complex he couldn't quite name. "My name is Arya," he said. "What's yours?" "Melling," she replied, her voice regaining strength. I was a nun. I came here from China for a short retreat." Arya's eyes widened. "A nun? From China?" It felt like the universe had drawn 2 vastly different people together. He, a devout Muslim from a simple village; she, a Buddhist nun bound by vows and silence. Yet in this moment, none of that seemed to matter. Over the next few days, Arya took care of her. He brought food, checked in after work, and stayed nearby in case she needed anything. Melling said little, often staring out the dusty window, lost in thought. But her eyes followed Arya when he moved, and sometimes, just briefly, they softened when he smiled. Their worlds couldn't be more different. But their silence, shared unspoken, was the beginning of something neither of them fully understood. One afternoon, they sat beneath a large tree in a nearby park. The sun filtered through the leaves, casting a golden glow. Melling looked up at the sky with vacant eyes. Arya remained quiet, sensing her need for space. Still, the closeness between them was undeniable. After a long pause, Melling finally spoke. "I don't know why I feel this way around you," she said softly. "In my teachings, we are told to let go of attachment. But since I met you, I feel confused." Arya turned to her, his voice equally gentle. "I feel it too," he admitted. "But I don't know what to do about it. I don't want to disrespect your beliefs. I just can't pretend this feeling doesn't exist." A fragile silence followed. Melling lowered her gaze. "I'm not supposed to feel anything. Not like this. But I do." As the days turned into weeks, their bond deepened. Melling began to smile more often. She no longer trembled when Arya approached. And Arya, though cautious, found himself waiting for the moment he'd see her again. At night, while Melling sat in quiet meditation, Arya would pray, his head bowed in the small corner of the building he used for worship. He asked for guidance, not just for himself, but for the woman whose presence had shaken the foundation of his heart. One night Melling couldn't sleep. She paced quietly, her thoughts a storm. Drawn by a calm she didn't understand, she peeked into Arya's room through the small gap in the curtain. There he was, motionless in prayer, his movements slow and deliberate. There was something different about the way he prayed, not just the physical posture, but the calm that radiated from him. It wasn't like her meditation. This felt deeper, personal. For the first time in her life, she felt a pull, not toward a man, but towards something larger, something invisible but undeniably present. As Arya finished and opened his eyes, he was startled to see her standing in the doorway, tears silently trailing down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding," he said, rising slowly. "Is everything all right?" "I don't know," Melling whispered. "When I saw you just now, praying, I felt something I've never felt before. It was like peace. Not the kind I was trained to find through silence. Something else." Arya looked at her, his voice gentle and steady. "When we pray, we believe we're connecting directly with the one who created us. It brings peace not just to the mind, but to the soul." Melling nodded slowly, her heart heavy. "I want to understand. I want to know more." Arya's expression softened. He didn't say anything right away. He simply stepped aside, opened the curtain wider, and offered her a place to sit. And so, two hearts, divided by culture, religion, and history, sat quietly side by side, neither sure where this path would lead, but both drawn by a mysterious, growing light they could no longer deny. The days following that moment of spiritual connection between Arya and Melling were filled with quiet understanding. Something had shifted, not just in the way they looked at each other, but in the way Melling began to see the world. She would often sit by the window during the day, watching the outside world pass by. At night, when Arya prayed, she no longer stayed away. She sat near the doorway, listening silently, letting the rhythm of his prayer calm her. It was unlike anything she had experienced in her Buddhist practice. This wasn't just stillness of the body, it was stillness of the soul. But with this newfound curiosity came turmoil. Melling knew she was straying from the path she had dedicated her life to. Her vows, her beliefs, everything she had been taught, none of it allowed for this kind of feeling. And yet, every time she looked at Arya, something deep inside her stirred. It wasn't just affection. It was longing. For truth. For peace. One afternoon, they sat beneath the same tree as before. Arya handed her a cup of tea, warm and fragrant. Melling accepted it with a grateful nod. "Have you ever felt like you were standing between two cliffs?" she said suddenly. "And no matter which way you go, something inside you will fall?" Arya turned to her slowly. "Yes," he said. "I've felt that when my faith was tested. When I had to choose between comfort and conviction." Melling's eyes met his. "That's how I feel now. I can't stop thinking about everything I've known, and everything I've felt since I met you." Arya didn't reply immediately. He was careful not to influence her. As much as he longed for closeness, he respected her spiritual journey more. "It's okay to feel torn," he finally said. "Seeking truth is never simple. It's supposed to shake us." That night, Melling found herself staring at the stack of books Arya had lent her, translations of sacred texts, books on faith, justice, mercy, and the meaning of life. With trembling hands, she opened one and began to read. Slowly at first. Then page after page. She found words about compassion, equality, inner peace, things she recognized from her Buddhist roots, but here, they were clearer. More personal. Less about self and more about purpose. One verse, in particular, moved her deeply. It spoke of mercy, of a love that encompassed all creation. That night she cried. Not out of sadness, but out of relief. She had spent so long trying to empty her heart. Now, for the first time, it felt full. Still, she kept her search a secret from Arya. Not because she didn't trust him, but because she didn't yet trust herself. What if this was just emotion? What if it passed? But it didn't. Night after night, Melling returned to the books. Day after day, she observed Arya from afar. His patience, his quiet strength, his humility, they weren't acts. They were part of him. And the way he worshipped, it wasn't just ritual. It was love. Eventually, she started to join him in small ways. Sitting beside him during prayer. Asking questions. Listening more than she spoke. Arya never pushed. He only answered what she asked, never more. That restraint made her trust him even more. Then came the day the world around them caught up. Word began to spread within the local Buddhist community. Whispers turned into concern. Concern turned into confrontation. Senior monks arrived at the abandoned house, their faces stern. Melling greeted them with respect, but the tension in the air was thick. "You have been absent," one of the monks said. "And there are troubling reports." "I needed time," Melling replied calmly. "You are a nun," another reminded her. "You cannot need time. You took a vow." Melling's throat tightened. "I never meant to break anything." "Then why do we hear of your closeness to a man outside our teachings? Why have you neglected your duties?" Arya stood at a distance, listening. He didn't interrupt. He knew this wasn't his battle. Melling took a breath. "Because I've been searching. And in that search, I found peace somewhere I never expected." The monks exchanged troubled glances. "You mean in his religion?" Melling nodded slowly. "You are betraying your robe." "I am following my heart," she answered, her voice firm. The eldest monk looked at her with disappointment. "Then we cannot allow you to continue with us. If you choose this path, you leave ours behind forever." Silence followed. Melling looked down for a moment, then back up. Her eyes didn't waver. "Then I accept that." That night, as Arya prepared a simple dinner, Melling finally spoke the words she had carried for so long. "Arya," she said, her voice steady, "I've made a decision. I've read, I've prayed, I've cried, and I've found what I was looking for. I want to embrace your faith. I want to become a Muslim." Arya stopped. He looked at her, eyes wide with both joy and disbelief. "Are you sure?" he asked gently. She nodded. "With all my heart." Arya smiled. Not the broad smile of excitement, but the kind that came from deep peace. "Then let's go together," he said. "To the mosque." The next day, they walked hand in hand to a small mosque in the city. The imam welcomed them warmly. Arya introduced her with pride. The ceremony was simple. She stood in front of the imam, eyes shining, and repeated the declaration of faith. As the words left her lips, Melling felt a wave wash over her, like the world had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. She felt light. Whole. At peace. Arya stood beside her, tears in his eyes. Afterward, the imam embraced her. "Welcome, sister," he said. "May your path be blessed." For the first time in her life, Melling felt free. Not from the world, but from the weight she had carried in silence. Her journey had led her here, not to abandon her past, but to fulfill it in a way she never imagined. That night she wore a simple headscarf for the first time. When she saw herself in the mirror, she didn't see someone who had changed, she saw someone who had come home. Arya smiled as she walked toward him. "Your new beginning," he said softly. Melling took his hand. "Our new beginning." And just like that, two people from different worlds became one, united not by religion or romance alone, but by a shared truth they had both found through struggle, faith, and love. The days that followed Melling's conversion were filled with a quiet joy either of them had experienced before. Arya continued working at the steel factory, but every evening when he returned home, he found Melling waiting with a warm smile, a book in her hand, or questions about her new faith in her heart. Their conversations deepened. They prayed together. They shared meals, laughter, and sometimes even tears. But peace, they both knew, would not come without tests. It wasn't long before news of Melling's decision reached the Buddhist monastery where she had once lived and studied. The reaction was swift and harsh. The community that had once been her home now saw her as a symbol of betrayal. Her choice to embrace another faith, especially while still wearing the memories of her vows, was seen not just as a personal decision, but as an insult to everything she had once represented. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten. Cold. It requested her presence at the monastery. Melling's hands trembled as she held it. She had expected this confrontation, but the weight of it was still heavy. Arya, noticing her anxiety, placed his hand over hers. "You don't have to face them alone," he said. Melling looked at him with a grateful smile. "I know. But I must go. I owe them an explanation, not for permission, but out of respect." The next morning, they traveled together to the monastery, a place once sacred to her. As they entered the quiet courtyard, several monks stood waiting. At the center was the senior monk who had once mentored her. His eyes, usually calm and serene, now carried the weight of disappointment. "Melling," he said, "why have you returned in this condition?" She lowered her gaze but stood tall. "I came to speak truthfully, teacher. I have found a different path. It brings me peace. A kind of peace I had searched for but never fully found until now." "And you chose this path with him?" the monk asked, gesturing toward Arya. "I chose this path with my heart," Melling replied. "And yes, Arya helped me understand it. But the decision was mine." The senior monk sighed. "You were a student of our way. You knew the teachings. You made vows. Now you cast it all aside?" "I have not cast aside the pursuit of peace," she said gently. "I have simply walked into a truth that spoke more clearly to me." "But at what cost?" another monk asked. "You abandon us. You abandon your calling." "I'm not abandoning peace," she repeated. "I'm embracing it." The room fell silent. Finally, the senior monk spoke again. "Then from this day forward, you are no longer part of our community. Your path is yours to walk, but you walk it without us." Melling felt her throat tighten. A piece of her life had just been cut away. Yet, strangely, her heart felt lighter. She had feared rejection, but now that it had come, she realized it couldn't take away the peace she had found. As they left the monastery, Arya stayed silent, letting her process it all. Finally, she turned to him. "It hurts more than I thought it would." He nodded. "Letting go of something that once gave you meaning is never easy. But I know I did the right thing," she said. Arya smiled. "I know you did too." Back in the quiet of their home, Melling sat on the prayer mat Arya had given her. She prayed. Not perfectly. Not fluently. But sincerely. And in those clumsy, whispered words she found peace again. That night, under the soft light of the moon, Melling turned to Arya with tears in her eyes, but this time, they were not from pain. "I want to spend my life with you," she said. Arya's heart skipped a beat. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "I want us to build a life together. A home. A family. Not just in this world, but in the life to come." He took her hands in his. "Then let's make that promise." They planned a simple wedding at the local mosque. No grand ceremony. No extravagant dress. Just the two of them, a few friends from the Muslim community, and the imam who had welcomed Melling into the faith. On the day of their wedding, Melling wore a white scarf draped gently over her head. Her face glowed with peace. Arya stood beside her in modest, traditional attire. Their vows were spoken not in loud voices, but with deep conviction. When the imam asked Arya, "Do you accept Melling as your wife, to protect and honor her, to lead her in faith and kindness?" Arya replied, "With all my heart I do." And when Melling was asked, "Do you accept Arya as your husband, to stand by him in faith through hardship and joy?" she smiled and said, "I do." With that, they were declared husband and wife. After the ceremony, they sat side by side in the mosque's prayer room. The sunlight filtering through the windows painted golden shapes on the walls. Arya held Melling's hand. "We've come a long way," he said quietly. "And it's only the beginning," she replied. That evening, back at their small apartment, Melling cooked dinner for the first time as Arya's wife. It was simple: rice, vegetables, and fish, but it tasted like joy. They sat on the floor, laughing between bites, sharing stories, reminiscing about how strange and beautiful their journey had been. As they finished their meal, Melling looked around the room. "This place, it's not much." Arya smiled. "No, but it's ours." She leaned against him. "And it feels like home." They spent the rest of the evening quietly, sitting together, their fingers intertwined. Melling had once lived in a temple, surrounded by silence and detachment. Now she was here, held in the warmth of a love she never expected. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: they had chosen to walk it together. For Arya, every sacrifice he had made as a migrant worker now felt worth it. And for Melling, every tear shed, every doubt endured, had led her to a peace she didn't know existed. They were no longer two strangers from different worlds. They were one heart, one home, and one faith-bound journey. Months passed quietly, like waves smoothing the shore. Arya and Melling's life in Taiwan was filled with love, routines, and learning. Melling adjusted well to her new identity, not just as a Muslim woman, but as a wife, a partner, and a seeker of truth. But something had been stirring in Arya's heart for a while. One evening, as they shared dinner in their modest apartment, Arya looked at Melling with a thoughtful expression. "Melling," he said gently, "my work contract here is ending soon. I've been thinking about returning to Indonesia." She looked up, surprised. "To your hometown?" He nodded. "Yes. I miss my family. My village. I think it's time we started our life there, closer to the people who raised me and the land that shaped me." Melling was silent for a moment. The idea of moving to a country she had never seen, whose language she barely knew, frightened her. But as she looked at Arya, she saw the longing in his eyes. A longing for home. "I'll follow you," she said, her voice firm. "Wherever you go, I go too." They began preparations slowly. Arya finalized his paperwork, closed his accounts, and sold their few belongings. Meanwhile, Melling began learning basic Indonesian phrases. Arya would teach her after work, and they would laugh at her mispronunciations, turning language lessons into sweet memories. When the day of departure arrived, they stood side by side at the airport. Melling wore her white headscarf and a long dress, her hands wrapped around Arya's. She looked nervous, but determined. "This is a big step," Arya said, smiling. "I know," she whispered. "But I'm ready." The journey back to Indonesia was long but full of reflection. Arya stared out the window, imagining the fields and roads of his village. Melling sat beside him with her head on his shoulder, feeling both fear and excitement. Upon landing, Arya's family was already at the airport. His mother, a gentle woman with soft eyes, was the first to embrace him. "My son," she said, tears filling her eyes. "You've returned." Then she turned to Melling. There was a pause, brief, tense, and then the woman reached out and embraced her too. "Welcome," she said simply. The warmth of that gesture melted Melling's anxiety. They returned to Arya's village, a quiet town nestled between green hills and rice paddies. The air was fresh. The call to prayer echoed softly through the evening sky. It was all so different from Taiwan, but Melling found comfort in the simplicity. At first, things weren't easy. The culture, the customs, the language, all were unfamiliar to Melling. At community events, she often felt out of place. But Arya never left her side, always introducing her kindly and proudly as his wife. "You don't have to be perfect," he'd tell her when she fumbled with words. "You just have to try." His mother too helped. She taught Melling how to cook Indonesian dishes, shared household traditions, and treated her like a daughter. Slowly, Melling began to feel like she belonged. She started attending women's study groups at the local mosque. There, she met others who welcomed her with curiosity and kindness. Among them was Sidi, a woman from a nearby city who had also converted to Islam after marriage. "You remind me of myself," Sidi told her during one of their chats. "I was scared too. But faith has a way of planting roots where you never imagined." Their friendship blossomed, and with every shared prayer and conversation, Melling's confidence grew. One evening, Melling sat with Arya under a tree in their backyard, the stars shining above them. "I never imagined this life," she said. "To go from being a monk to being your wife, from a temple in China to a village in Indonesia. It feels like a dream." Arya smiled. "And yet it's real." She nodded. "And it's beautiful." Their life was simple. Arya took up work in a nearby town. Melling focused on her faith, her community, and supporting their small home. They shared everything: chores, goals, worries, prayers. And yet, amid the peace, challenges still came. Some people in the village whispered about Melling. "She's not from here," they said. "She was a monk once. Can we really trust that she's changed?" Others doubted her sincerity, or made her feel like an outsider. It hurt, but Melling stayed quiet. She knew that hearts don't change with one conversation. They change with patience, time, and sincerity. One day, as she walked back from the mosque, a young girl approached her and asked shyly, "Are you really Chinese?" Melling smiled. "Yes. But you wear a hijab like us." "Because now I am one of you." The girl grinned and ran off, and Melling felt a small victory in her heart. Back home, Arya had begun building a new prayer room behind the house. He wanted a space for reflection, for both of them. As they painted the walls together, he said, "One day, this room will witness our child learning to pray." Melling laughed, brushing paint on his nose. "One step at a time, husband." Their love deepened, not just as man and wife, but as two people who had chosen to walk a difficult path together. They had crossed cultures, faiths, and rejection. They had faced fear, grief, and longing. But above all, they had held tightly to each other. And it was enough. Late one night, Melling sat in the new prayer room, her hands resting on her lap. She had just finished reading a passage that spoke of patience and reward. She looked out the window at the moon and whispered, "Thank you for leading me here." Because in the silence of the night, in the warmth of her new life, she no longer felt like she had left something behind. She had arrived. Time moved gently in Arya and Melling's new life. Seasons passed. With every morning prayer, every shared meal, and every quiet evening on the veranda, their bond grew deeper. What had started with a chance encounter on a cold night in Taiwan had now blossomed into a life filled with faith, love, and understanding. Though they had weathered many storms, spiritual battles, cultural rejection, language barriers, Melling now felt a deep sense of peace. Her heart no longer fluttered with uncertainty. She knew who she was, a Muslim woman, a devoted wife, a seeker of truth. One morning, as the village awoke to the distant call to prayer and the soft rustle of banana trees in the wind, Arya stepped out of the small prayer room at the back of their home. Melling was already in the kitchen, preparing tea with gentle hands. He watched her for a moment. Her movements were calm, filled with purpose. Her white hijab was slightly tilted, a reminder that she was still learning, but there was grace in her every step. "Melling," Arya said, stepping forward. She turned and smiled. "Yes?" He held up a small envelope. "I've been offered a permanent teaching position at the Islamic school in our village." Her eyes lit up. "Really? That's wonderful." He nodded. "It's not a big salary, but it's stable. And I'll have more time for us. For community work. For teaching the children." Melling placed the teapot down and embraced him. "You'll be amazing. You've taught me so much already." Their modest home slowly became a center for goodness in the village. Children came by to study Qur'an with Arya. Women visited Melling for conversations and lessons on what she had learned in her spiritual journey. Despite once being an outsider, she now felt truly accepted. One afternoon, Sidi, her dear friend, visited with her young daughter. "You've changed so much," Sidi said, sipping tea. "But in the best way." Melling chuckled. "Sometimes I still forget how to pronounce words properly. Yesterday I said Sapi instead of Shafi'i and confused everyone at the study group." They both laughed. "But no one minds," Sidi said kindly. Because you speak with your heart. Still, not all challenges had vanished. Occasionally, whispers from neighboring towns would reach them. A few religious figures questioned Melling's conversion, suggesting it might have been emotional, not theological. Arya never reacted with anger. Instead, he responded with kindness and quiet strength. Faith is not a show for others, he once said in a sermon at the mosque. It is a seed between you and your Creator. Only He knows its depth. The community grew to admire them not only as a couple, but as an example of resilience. Their story was told not with fanfare, but with respect. Then one day, as they were sitting beneath the mango tree in their backyard, Melling placed her hand over Arya's and said softly, "I think it's time." He looked at her, confused. "Time for what?" She smiled, her eyes shining. "To build our family." For a moment, Arya said nothing. Then he broke into a wide, joyful grin. "You're ready?" "I am," she nodded. "If Allah wills, I want to raise children with you. I want them to grow up surrounded by love and faith." They embraced, their hearts full of dreams. The months that followed were a mix of preparation and anticipation. Arya painted a small room in the house a soft green. Melling began sewing small clothes, her hands trembling with excitement and nervousness. And then, on a clear morning as the village came to life, Melling gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Rafiq, meaning companion, because he had already brought them closer to one another and to their faith. The birth was not just the start of a child's life, it was a renewal of purpose. With Rafiq in her arms, Melling felt the full circle of her journey. From a Buddhist nun cloaked in orange robes, standing in silent temples, to a mother in a modest home, her hijab fluttering in the morning breeze, singing lullabies to a child she once never dreamed of having. One day, Arya held Rafiq close and whispered to him, "Your mother walked through fire to get here. She gave up everything she once knew, not for me, but for the truth that reached her heart. She's the bravest person I know." Melling overheard him from the doorway. Tears filled her eyes, but they were not of sorrow. They were the quiet, grateful tears of a woman who had found her place in the world. She walked in and sat beside Arya. "Do you ever think about Taiwan?" she asked. "Sometimes," he replied. "That cold night. That scream. That fight. That moment when I saw you for the first time. And you thought I was a nun. You were a nun." He laughed. "A fierce one." They both smiled, their eyes lingering on the baby now sleeping between them. "I don't regret any of it," she said. "Neither do I." As time continued its silent passage, their lives remained simple. Arya taught. Melling served. Rafiq grew. The home echoed with Quranic recitations, laughter, and the sounds of footsteps on polished floors. Melling sometimes spoke to groups of women, reverts and locals alike, sharing her story not to impress, but to remind them that every journey is sacred, and that the heart is a mysterious compass. Years later, when she sat with Rafiq on her lap and he asked, "Mama, where are you from?" she didn't hesitate. "I'm from a path that led me here. From far away. But now I belong right here, with you and Papa." And that was enough. Because in the end, their story wasn't about religion alone, or even love alone. It was about two people, flawed, faithful, and full of hope, who found each other across cultures, across worlds, and walked together into light. Not perfectly, but sincerely. And that sincerity made all the difference.